Stories I have tried to write. I have neither much experience nor much perseverance in the writing of stories. I'm thinking exclusively of ghost stories, for I never cared to try any other kind. And it has amused me sometimes to think of the stories which have crossed my mind from time to time and never materialized properly. Never properly, for some of them I have actually written down, and they repose in a drawer somewhere. To borrow Sir Walter Scott's most frequent quotation, "Look on them again, I dare not." They were not good enough. Yet some of them had ideas in them which refused to blossom in the surroundings I had devised for them, but perhaps came up in other forms in stories that did get as far as print. Let me recall them for the benefit, so to style it, of somebody else. There was the story of a man travelling in a train in France. Facing him sat a typical Frenchwoman of mature years, with the usual moustache and a very confirmed countenance. He had nothing to read but an antiquated novel he had bought for its binding. Madame de Liechtenstein, it was called. Tired of looking out of the window and studying his vis-à-vis, he began drowsily turning the pages and paused at a conversation between two of the characters. They were discussing an acquaintance, a woman who lived in a largish house at Marcilly-le-Air. The house was described, and, here we were coming to a point, the mysterious disappearance of the woman's husband. Her name was mentioned, and my reader couldn't help thinking he knew it in some other connection. Just then the train stopped at a country station. The traveller, with a start, woke up from a doze, the book open in his hand. The woman opposite him got out, and on the label of her bag he read the name that had seemed to be in his novel. Well, he went on to Troyes, and from there he made excursions, and one of these took him at lunchtime to Marcilly-le-Air. The hotel in the Grande Place faced a three-gabled house of some pretensions. Out of it came a well-dressed woman whom he had seen before. Conversation with the waiter. Yes, the lady was a widow, or so it was believed. At any rate, nobody knew what had become of her husband. Here, I think, we broke down. Of course, there was no such conversation in the novel as the traveller thought he had read. Then there was quite a long one about two undergraduates spending Christmas in a country house that belonged to one of them. An uncle, next heir to the estate, lived near. Plausible and learned Roman priest, living with the uncle, makes himself agreeable to the young men. Dark walks home at night after dining with the uncle. Curious disturbances as they pass through the shrubberies. Strange, shapeless tracks in the snow round the house, observed in the morning. Efforts to lure away the companion and isolate the proprietor and get him to come out after dark. Ultimate defeat and death of the priest, upon whom the familiar, balked of another victim, turns. Also the story of two students of King's College, Cambridge, in the 16th century, who were in fact expelled thence for magical practices, and their nocturnal expedition to a witch at Fenstanton, and of how, at the turning to Lulworth on the Huntingdon Road, they met a company leading an unwilling figure whom they seemed to know, and of how, on arriving at Fenstanton, they learned of the witch's death, and of what they saw seated upon her newly dug grave. These were some of the tales which got as far as the stage of being written down, at least in part. There were others that flitted across the mind from time to time, but never really took shape. The man, for instance, naturally a man with something on his mind, who, sitting in his study one evening, was startled by a slight sound, turned hastily, and saw a certain dead face looking out from between the window curtains. A dead face, but with living eyes. He made a dash at the curtains and tore them apart. A pasteboard mask fell to the floor. But there was no one there, and the eyes of the mask were but eye holes. What was to be done about that? There is the touch on the shoulder that comes when you are walking quickly homewards in the dark hours, full of anticipation of the warm room and bright fire, and when you pull up, startled, what face or no face do you see? Similarly, when Mr. Badman had decided to settle the hash of Mr. Goodman and had picked out just the right thicket by the roadside from which to fire at him, how came it exactly that when Mr. Goodman and his unexpected friend actually did pass, they found Mr. Badman weltering in the road? He was able to tell them something of what he had found waiting for him, even beckoning to him in the thicket, enough to prevent them from looking into it themselves. There are possibilities here, but the labour of constructing the proper setting has been beyond me. There may be possibilities, too, in the Christmas cracker, if the right people pull it, and if the motto which they find inside has the right message on it. They will probably leave the party early, pleading indisposition, but very likely a previous engagement of long standing would be the more truthful excuse. In parenthesis, many common objects may be made the vehicles of retribution, and where retribution is not called for, of malice. Be careful how you handle the packet you pick up in the carriage drive, particularly if it contains nail parings and hair. Do not in any case bring it into the house. It may not be alone. ... Dots are believed by many writers of our day to be a good substitute for effective writing. They are certainly an easy one. Let us have a few more. ... Late on Monday night, a toad came into my study, and though nothing has so far seemed to link itself with this appearance, I feel that it may not be quite prudent to brood over topics which may open the interior eye to the presence of more formidable visitants. Enough said. The Uncommon Prayer Book. Mr. Davidson was spending the first week in January alone in a country town. A combination of circumstances had driven him to that drastic course. His nearest relations were enjoying winter sports abroad, and the friends who had been kindly anxious to replace them had an infectious complaint in the house. Doubtless he might have found someone else to take pity on him, but, he reflected, most of them have made up their parties, and after all, it is only for 3 or 4 days at most that I have to fend for myself, and it will be just as well if I can get a move on with my introduction to the Leaventhorpe papers. I might use the time by going down as near as I can to Galsford and making acquaintance with the neighbourhood. I ought to see the remains of Leaventhorpe House and the tombs in the church. The first day after his arrival at the Swan Hotel at Longbridge was so stormy that he got no farther than the tobacconist's. The next, comparatively bright, he used for his visit to Galsford, which interested him more than a little, but had no ulterior consequences. The third, which was really a pearl of a day for early January, was too fine to be spent indoors. He gathered from the landlord that a favourite practice of visitors in the summer was to take a morning train to a couple of stations westward and walk back down the valley of the Tent through Stanford St. Thomas and Stanford Magdalen, both of which were accounted highly picturesque villages. He closed with this plan, and we now find him seated in a third-class carriage at 9:45 a.m. on his way to Kingsbourne Junction and studying the map of the district. One old man was his only fellow traveller, a piping old man who seemed inclined for conversation. So Mr. Davidson, after going through the necessary versicles and responses about the weather, inquired whether he was going far. "No, sir, not far, not this morning, sir," said the old man. "I ain't only going so far as what they call Kingsbourne Junction. There isn't but 2 stations twixt here and there. Yes, they calls it Kingsbourne Junction." "I'm going there too," said Mr. Davidson. "Oh, indeed, sir? Do you know that part?" "No, I'm only going for the sake of taking a walk back to Longbridge and seeing a bit of the country." "Oh, indeed, sir? Well, 'tis a beautiful day for a gentleman as enjoys a bit of a walk." "Yes, to be sure. Have you got far to go when you get to Kingsbourne?" "No, sir, I ain't got far to go once I get to Kingsbourne Junction. I'm going to see my daughter, sir. She live at Broxtone. That's about 2 mile across the fields from what they call Kingsbourne Junction, that is. You got that marked down on your map, I expect, sir?" "I expect I have. Let me see. Broxtone, did you say?" Here's Kingsbourne, yes, and which way is Broxtone? Towards the Stanfords? Ah, I see it. Broxtone Court, in a park. I don't see the village, though. No, sir, you wouldn't see no village of Broxtone. There ain't only the court and the chapel of Broxtone. Chapel? Oh, yes, that's marked here, too. The chapel, close by the court, it seems to be. Does it belong to the court? Yes, sir, that's close up to the court, only a step. Yes, that belonged to the court. My daughter, you see, sir, she's the keeper's wife now, and she live at the court and look after things now the family's away. No one living there now, then? No, sir, not for a number of years. The old gentleman, he lived there when I was a lad, and the lady, she lived on after him, to very near upon 90 year of age, and then she died, and them that have it now, they've got this other place in Warwickshire, I believe 'tis, and they don't do nothing about letting the court out. But Colonel Wildman, he have the shooting, and young Mr. Clark, he's the agent, he come over once in so many weeks to see to things, and my daughter's husband, he's the keeper. And who uses the chapel? Just the people round about, I suppose? Oh, no one don't use the chapel. Why, there ain't no one to go. All the people about, they go to Stanford St. Thomas Church. But my son-in-law, he go to Kingsbourne Church now, because the gentleman at Stanford, he have this Gregory singing, and my son-in-law, he don't like that. He say he can hear the old donkey braying any day of the week, and he likes something a little cheerful on the Sunday. The old man drew his hand across his mouth and laughed. That's what my son-in-law say. He say he can hear the old donkey, etc. Da capo. Mr. Davidson also laughed as honestly as he could, thinking meanwhile that Broxtone Court and Chapel would probably be worth including in his walk. For the map showed that from Broxtone he could strike the Tent Valley quite as easily as by following the main Kingsbourne-Longbridge road. So, when the mirth excited by the remembrance of the son-in-law's bon mot had died down, he returned to the charge, and ascertained that both the court and the chapel were of the class known as old-fashioned places, and that the old man would be very willing to take him thither, and his daughter would be happy to show him whatever she could. But that ain't a lot, sir. Not as if the family was living there. All the looking-glasses is covered up, and the paintings and the curtains and carpets folded away. Not but what I dare say she could show you a pair just to look at, because she go over 'em to see the moth shouldn't get into 'em. I shan't mind about that, thank you, if she can show me the inside of the chapel. That's what I'd like best to see. Oh, she can show you that right enough, sir. She have the key to the door, you see, and most weeks she go in and dust about. It's a nice chapel, that is. My son-in-law, he say he'll be bound they didn't have none of this Gregory singing there. Oh, dear, I can't help but smile when I think of him saying that about the old donkey. I can hear him bray, he say, any day of the week. And so he can, sir. That's true, anyway. The walk across the fields from Kingsbourne to Broxtone was very pleasant. It lay for the most part on the top of the country, and commanded wide views over a succession of ridges, plough and pasture, or covered with dark blue woods, all ending more or less abruptly on the right in headlands that overlooked the wide valley of a great western river. The last field they crossed was bounded by a close copse, and no sooner were they in it than the path turned downward very sharply, and it became evident that Broxtone was neatly fitted into a sudden and very narrow valley. It was not long before they had glimpses of groups of smokeless stone chimneys and stone-tiled roofs close beneath their feet. And not many minutes after that, they were wiping their shoes at the back door of Broxtone Court, while the keeper's dogs barked very loudly in unseen places, and Mrs. Porter, in quick succession, screamed at them to be quiet, greeted her father, and begged both her visitors to step in. It was not to be expected that Mr. Davidson should escape being taken through the principal rooms of the court, in spite of the fact that the house was entirely out of commission. Pictures, carpets, curtains, furniture were all covered up or put away, as old Mr. Avery had said. And the admiration which our friend was very ready to bestow had to be lavished on the proportions of the rooms, and on the one painted ceiling, upon which an artist who had fled from London in the plague year had depicted the triumph of loyalty and defeat of sedition. In this, Mr. Davidson could show an unfeigned interest. The portraits of Cromwell, Ayrton, Bradshaw, Peters and the rest, writhing in carefully devised torments, were evidently the part of the design to which most pains had been devoted. "That were the old lady Sadler had that painting done, same as the one what put up the chapel. They say she were the first that went up to London to dance on Oliver Cromwell's grave." So said Mr. Avery, and continued musingly, "Well, I suppose she got some satisfaction to her mind, but I don't know as I should want to pay the fare to London and back just for that. And my son-in-law, he say the same. He say he don't know as he would have cared to pay all that money only for that. I was telling the gentleman as we come along in the train, Mary, what your Harry says about this Gregory singing down at Stanford here. We had a bit of a laugh over that, sir, didn't us?" Yes, to be sure we did. Once again, Mr. Davidson strove to do justice to the pleasantry of the keeper. "But," he said, "if Mrs. Porter can show me the chapel, I think it should be now, for the days aren't long, and I want to get back to Longbridge before it falls quite dark." Even if Broxtone Court has not been illustrated in rural life, and I think it has not, I do not propose to point out its excellencies here. But of the chapel a word must be said. It stands about 100 yards from the house and has its own little graveyard and trees about it. It is a stone building, about 70 feet long, and in the Gothic style, as that style was understood in the middle of the 17th century. On the whole, it resembles some of the Oxford College chapels as much as anything, save that it has a distinct chancel, like a parish church, and a fanciful domed bell turret at the southwest angle. When the west door was thrown open, Mr. Davidson could not repress an exclamation of pleased surprise at the completeness and richness of the interior. Screenwork, pulpit, seating, and glass, all were of the same period, and as he advanced into the nave and sighted the organ case with its gold-embossed pipes in the western gallery, his cup of satisfaction was filled. The glass in the nave windows was chiefly armorial, and in the chancel were figure subjects of the kind that may be seen at Abbey Door of Lord Scudamore's work. But this is not an archaeological review. While Mr. Davidson was still busy examining the remains of the organ, attributed to one of the Dallams, I believe, old Mr. Avery had stumped up into the chancel and was lifting the dust cloths from the blue velvet cushions of the stall desks. Evidently, it was here that the family sat. Mr. Davidson heard him say, in a rather hushed tone of surprise, "Why, Mary, here's all the books open again." The reply was in a voice that sounded peevish rather than surprised. "Well, there, I never." Mrs. Porter went over to where her father was standing, and they continued talking in a lower key. Mr. Davidson saw plainly that something not quite in the common run was under discussion, so he came down the gallery stairs and joined them. There was no sign of disorder in the chancel any more than in the rest of the chapel, which was beautifully clean. But the 8 folio prayer books on the cushions of the stall desks were indubitably open. Mrs. Porter was inclined to be fretful over it. "Whoever can it be as does it?" she said. "For there's no key but mine, nor yet door but the one we come in by, and the windows is barred, every one of 'em. I don't like it, father, that I don't." "What is it, Mrs. Porter? Anything wrong?" said Mr. Davidson. "No, sir, nothing really wrong, only these books. Every time, pretty near, that I come in to do up the place, I shuts 'em and spreads the cloths over 'em to keep off the dust, ever since Mr. Clark spoke about it, when I first come. And yet there they are again, and always the same page. And as I says, whoever it can be as does it with the door and windows shut. And as I says, it makes anyone feel queer coming in here alone, as I have to. Not as I'm given that way myself, not to be frightened easy, I mean to say. And there's not a rat in the place. Not as no rat wouldn't trouble to do a thing like that, do you think, sir?" "Hardly, I should say, but it sounds very queer. Are they always open at the same place, did you say?" "Always the same place, sir. One of the Psalms it is. and I didn't particularly notice it the first time or two, till I see a little red line of printing, and it's always caught my eye since." Mr. Davidson walked along the stalls and looked at the open books. Sure enough, they all stood at the same page. Psalm 109, and at the head of it, just between the number and the Deus Laudum, was a rubric for the 25th day of April. Without pretending to minute knowledge of the history of the Book of Common Prayer, he knew enough to be sure that this was a very odd and wholly unauthorized addition to its text. And though he remembered that April the 25th is St. Mark's Day, he could not imagine what appropriateness this very savage psalm could have to that festival. With slight misgivings, he ventured to turn over the leaves to examine the title page, and knowing the need for particular accuracy in these matters, he devoted some 10 minutes to making a line-for-line transcript of it. The date was 1653. The printer called himself Anthony Cadman. He turned to the list of proper psalms for certain days. Yes, added to it was that same inexplicable entry, for the 25th day of April, the 109th Psalm. An expert would no doubt have thought of many other points to inquire into, but this antiquary, as I have said, was no expert. He took stock, however, of the binding, a handsome one of tooled blue leather, bearing the arms that figured in several of the nave windows in various combinations. "How often," he said at last to Mrs. Porter, "have you found these books lying open like this?" "Really, I couldn't say, sir, but it's a great many times now. Do you recollect, Father, me telling you about it the first time I noticed it?" "That I do, my dear. You was in a rare taking, and I don't so much wonder at it. That was 5 year ago. I was paying you a visit at Michaelmas time, and you come in at tea time, and says you, 'Father, there's the books laying open under the cloths again.' And I didn't know what my daughter was speaking about, you see, sir. And I says, 'Books?' Just like that, I says. And then it all came out. But as Harry says, that's my son-in-law, sir, 'Whoever it can be,' he says, 'as does it, because there ain't only the one door, and we keeps the key locked up,' he says, 'and the windows is barred, every one of them. Well,' he says, 'I lay once I could catch 'em at it, they wouldn't do it a second time,' he says. And no more they wouldn't, I don't believe, sir. Well, that was 5 year ago, and it's been happening constant ever since, by your account, my dear. Young Mr. Clark, he don't seem to think much to it, but then he don't live here, you see. And 'tisn't his business to come and clean up here of a dark afternoon, is it?" "I suppose you never notice anything else odd when you are at work here, Mrs. Porter?" said Mr. Davidson. "No, sir, I do not," said Mrs. Porter. "And it's a funny thing to me I don't, with a feeling I have as there's something set in here. No, it's the other side, just within the screen, and looking at me. All the time I'm dusting in the gallery and pews. But I never yet see nothing worse than myself, as the saying goes, and I kind of hope I never may." In the conversation that followed, there was not much of it. Nothing was added to the statement of the case. Having parted on good terms with Mr. Avery and his daughter, Mr. Davidson addressed himself to his 8-mile walk. The little valley of Broxstone soon led him down into the broader one of the Tent, and on to Stanford St. Thomas, where he found refreshment. We need not accompany him all the way to Longbridge, but as he was changing his socks before dinner, he suddenly paused and said half aloud, "By Jove, that's a rum thing." It had not occurred to him before how strange it was that any edition of the prayer book should have been issued in 1653, 7 years before the Restoration, 5 years before Cromwell's death, and when the use of the book, let alone the printing of it, was penal. He must have been a bold man who put his name and a date on that title page. Only, Mr. Davidson reflected, it probably was not his name at all, for the ways of printers in difficult times were devious. As he was in the front hall of the Swan that evening, making some investigations about trains, a small motor stopped in front of the door, and out of it came a small man in a fur coat who stood on the steps and gave directions in a rather yapping foreign accent to his chauffeur. When he came into the hotel, he was seen to be black-haired and pale-faced, with a little pointed beard and gold pince-nez. Altogether very neatly turned out. He went to his room, and Mr. Davidson saw no more of him till dinner-time. As they were the only two dining that night, it was not difficult for the newcomer to find an excuse for falling into talk. He was evidently wishing to make out what brought Mr. Davidson into that neighbourhood at that season. "Can you tell me how far it is from here to Arlingworth?" was one of his early questions, and it was one which threw some light on his own plans. For Mr. Davidson recollected having seen at the station an advertisement of a sale at Arlingworth Hall, comprising old furniture, pictures and books. This, then, was a London dealer. "No," he said, "I've never been there. I believe it lies out by Kingsbourne. It can't be less than 12 miles. I see there's a sale there shortly." The other looked at him inquisitively, and he laughed. "No," he said, as if answering a question, "you needn't be afraid of my competing. I'm leaving this place tomorrow." This cleared the air, and the dealer, whose name was Homburger, admitted that he was interested in books, and thought there might be, in these old country house libraries, something to repay a journey. "For," said he, "we English have always this marvellous talent for accumulating rarities in the most unexpected places, ain't it?" And in the course of the evening he was most interesting on the subject of finds made by himself and others. "I shall take the occasion after this sale to look round the district a bit. Perhaps you could inform me of some likely spots, Mr. Davidson?" But Mr. Davidson, though he had seen some very tempting locked-up bookcases at Broxton Court, kept his counsel. He did not really like Mr. Homburger. Next day, as he sat in the train, a little ray of light came to illuminate one of yesterday's puzzles. He happened to take out an almanac diary that he had bought for the new year, and it occurred to him to look at the remarkable events for April the 25th. There it was, St. Mark, Oliver Cromwell born, 1599. That, coupled with the painted ceiling, seemed to explain a good deal. The figure of old Lady Sadler became more substantial to his imagination, as of one in whom love for church and king had gradually given place to intense hate of the power that had silenced the one and slaughtered the other. What curious evil service was that which she and a few like her had been wont to celebrate year by year in that remote valley? And how in the world had she managed to elude authority? And again, did not this persistent opening of the books agree oddly with the other trays of her portrait known to him? It would be interesting for anyone who chanced to be near Broxton on the 25th of April to look in at the chapel and see if anything exceptional happened. When he came to think of it, there seemed to be no reason why he should not be that person himself. He, and if possible some congenial friend. He resolved that so it should be. Knowing that he knew really nothing about the printing of prayer books, he realized that he must make it his business to get the best light on the matter without divulging his reasons. I may say at once that his search was entirely fruitless. One writer of the early part of the 19th century, a writer of rather windy and rhapsodical chat about books, professed to have heard of a special anti-Cromwellian issue of the prayer book in the very midst of the Commonwealth period. But he did not claim to have seen a copy, and no one had believed him. Looking into this matter, Mr. Davidson found that the statement was based on letters from a correspondent who had lived near Longbridge. So he was inclined to think that the Broxton prayer books were at the bottom of it, and had excited a momentary interest. Months went on, and St. Mark's Day came near. Nothing interfered with Mr. Davidson's plans of visiting Broxton, or with those of the friend whom he had persuaded to go with him, and to whom alone he had confided the puzzle. The same 9:45 train, which had taken him in January, took them now to Kingsbourne. The same field path led them to Broxton. But today they stopped more than once to pick a cowslip. The distant woods and ploughed uplands were of another colour, and in the copse there was, as Mrs. Porter said, a regular charm of birds. Why, you couldn't hardly collect your mind sometimes with it. She recognised Mr. Davidson at once, and was very ready to do the honours of the chapel. The new visitor, Mr. Witham, was as much struck by the completeness of it as Mr. Davidson had been. "There can't be such another in England," he said. "Books open again, Mrs. Porter?" said Davidson, as they walked up to the chancel. "Dear, yes, I expect so, sir," said Mrs. Porter, as she drew off the cloths. "Well, there," she exclaimed the next moment, "if they ain't shut. That's the first time ever I've found 'em so. But it's not from want of care on my part, I do assure you, gentlemen, if they wasn't, for I felt the cloths the last thing before I shut up last week, when the gentleman had done photographed in the east window. And every one was shut, and where there was ribbons left, I tied 'em. Now I think of it, I don't remember ever to have done that before, and perhaps, whoever it is, it just made the difference to him. Well, it only shows, don't it? If at first you don't succeed, try again." Meanwhile, the two men had been examining the books, and now Davidson spoke. "I'm sorry to say, I'm afraid there's something wrong here, Mrs. Porter. These are not the same books." It would make too long a business to detail all Mrs. Porter's outcries and the questionings that followed. The upshot was this. Early in January, the gentleman had come to see over the chapel, and thought a great deal of it, and said he must come back in the spring weather and take some photographs. And only a week ago he drove up in his motoring car, and a very heavy box with the slides in it, and she'd locked him in because he said something about a long explosion, and she was afraid of some damage happening. And he says, no, not explosion, but it appeared the lantern what they take the slides with worked very slow. And so he was in there the best part of an hour, and she come and let him out, and he drove off with his box and all, and gave her his visiting card. And, oh, dear, to think of such a thing. He must have changed the books and took the old ones away with him in his box. What sort of a man was he? Oh, dear, he was a small-made gentleman, if you can call him so, after the way he behaved, with black hair, that is, if it was hair, and gold eyeglasses, if they was gold. Really, one don't know what to believe. Sometimes I doubt he weren't a real Englishman at all, and yet he seemed to know the language, and had the name on his visiting card, like anybody else might. Just so. Might we see the card? Yes, T.W. Henderson, and an address somewhere near Bristol. Well, Mrs. Porter, it's quite plain this Mr. Henderson, as he calls himself, has walked off with your 8 prayer books and put 8 others about the same size in place of them. Now listen to me. I suppose you must tell your husband about this, but neither you nor he must say one word about it to anyone else. If you'll give me the address of the agent, Mr. Clark, isn't it? I will write to him and tell him exactly what has happened, and it really is no fault of yours. But, you understand, we must keep it very quiet. And why? Because this man who has stolen the books will, of course, try to sell them one at a time. For I may tell you, they are worth a good deal of money. And the way we can bring it home to him is by keeping a sharp lookout and saying nothing. By dint of repeating the same advice in various forms, they succeeded in impressing Mrs. Porter with the real need for silence, and were forced to make a concession only in the case of Mr. Avery, who was expected on a visit shortly. "But you may be safe with father, sir," said Mrs. Porter. "Father ain't a talking man." It was not quite Mr. Davidson's experience of him. Still, there were no neighbours at Broxtone, and even Mr. Avery must be aware that gossip with anybody on such a subject would be likely to end in the Porters having to look out for another situation. A last question was whether Mr. Henderson, so-called, had anyone with him. "No, sir, not when he come he hadn't. He was working his own motoring car himself. And what luggage he had? Let me see. There was his lantern, and this box of slides inside the carriage, which I helped him into the chapel and out of it myself with it, if only I'd knowed. And as he drove away under the big yew tree by the monument, I see the long white bundle laying on the top of the coach, what I didn't notice when he drove up. But he's set in front, sir, and only the boxes inside behind him." And do you really think, sir, as his name wasn't Henderson at all? Oh, dear me, what a dreadful thing. Why, fancy what trouble it might bring to an innocent person that might never have set foot in the place but for that. They left Mrs. Porter in tears. On the way home there was much discussion as to the best means of keeping watch upon possible sales. What Henderson Homburger, for there could be no real doubt of the identity, had done was, obviously, to bring down the requisite number of folio prayer books, disused copies from college chapels and the like, bought ostensibly for the sake of the bindings, which were superficially like enough to the old ones, and to substitute them, at his leisure, for the genuine articles. A week had now passed without any public notice being taken of the theft. He would take a little time himself to find out about the rarity of the books, and would ultimately, no doubt, place them cautiously. Between them, Davidson and Witham were in a position to know a good deal of what was passing in the book world, and they could map out the ground pretty completely. A weak point with them, at the moment, was that neither of them knew under what other name or names Henderson Homburger carried on business. But there are ways of solving these problems. And yet, all this planning proved unnecessary. We are transported to a London office on this same 25th of April. We find there, within closed doors, late in the day, 2 police inspectors, a commissionaire, and a youthful clerk. The 2 latter, both rather pale and agitated in appearance, are sitting on chairs and being questioned. "How long do you say you've been in this Mr. Posvitz's employment?" 6 months. "And what was his business?" "Attended sales in various parts and brought home parcels of books." "Did he keep a shop anywhere?" "No. Disposed of them here and there, and sometimes to private collectors." "Right. Now then, when did he go out last?" "Rather better than a week ago." "Tell you where he was going?" "No. Said he was going to start next day from his private residence and shouldn't be at the office, that's here, before 2 days. You was to attend as usual." "Where is his private residence?" "Oh, that's the address. Norwood way, I see. Any family?" "Not in this country." "Now then, what account do you give of what's happened since he came back?" "Came back on Tuesday, did he? And this is Saturday. Bring any books?" "1 package. Where is it?" "In the safe. You got the key?" "Oh, no, to be sure, it's open, of course." "How did he seem when he got back? Cheerful?" "Well, how do you mean, curious?" "Thought he might be in for an illness. He said that, did he?" "Odd smell got in his nose. Couldn't get rid of it. Told you to let him know, wanted to see him before you let him in. That wasn't usual with him?" "Much the same all Wednesday, Thursday, Friday." "Out a good deal. Said he was going to the British Museum. Often went there to make inquiries in the way of his business. Walked up and down a lot in the office when he was in." "Anyone call in on those days?" "Mostly when he was out." "Anyone find him in?" "Oh, Mr. Collinson." "Who's Mr. Collinson?" "An old customer." "Know his address?" "All right, give it us afterwards." "Well, now, what about this morning? You left Mr. Posvich's here at 12 and went home. Anybody see you?" "Commissionaire, you did?" "Remained at home till summoned here." "Very well. Now, Commissionaire, we have your name, Watkins, eh? Very well. Make your statement. Don't go too quick, so we can get it down." "I was on duty here later than usual, Mr. Potwich having asked me to remain on, and ordered his lunching to be sent in, which came as ordered. I was in the lobby from 11:30 on, and see Mr. Bligh, the clerk, leave at about 12. After that, no one come in at all, except Mr. Potwich's lunching, come at 1 o'clock, and the man left in 5 minutes' time. Towards the afternoon, I became tired of waiting, and I come upstairs to this first floor. The outer door, what lead to the office, stood open, and I come up to the plate-glass door here. Mr. Potwich, he was standing behind the table smoking a cigar, and he laid it down on the mantelpiece and felt in his trouser pockets, took out a key and went across to the safe. And I knocked on the glass, thinking to see if he wanted me to come and take away his tray. But he didn't take no notice, being engaged with the safe door. Then he got it open and stooped down and seemed to be lifting up a package off of the floor of the safe. And then, sir, I see what looked to be like a great roll of old shabby white flannel, about 4 to 5 feet high, fall forwards, out of the inside of the safe, right against Mr. Potwitch's shoulder as he was stooping over. And Mr. Potwitch, he raised himself up, as it were, resting his hands on the package, and gave an exclamation. And I can't hardly expect you should take what I says, but as true as I stand here, I see this roll and a kind of a face in the upper end of it, sir. You can't be more surprised than what I was, I can assure you, and I've seen a lot in me time. Yes, I can describe it if you wish it, sir. It was very much the same as this wall here in colour. The wall had an earth-coloured distemper, and it had a bit of a band tied round underneath. And the eyes, well, they was dry-like, and much as if there was 2 big spiders' bodies in the holes. Hair? No, I don't know as there was much hair to be seen. The flannel stuff was over the top of the head. I'm very sure it warn't what it should have been. No, I only see it in a flash, but I took it in like a photographed. Wish I hadn't. Yes, sir, it fell right over onto Mr. Potwitch's shoulder, and this face hid in his neck. Yes, sir, about where the injury was. More like a ferret going for a rabbit than anything else. And he rolled over, and of course I tried to get in at the door. But as you know, sir, it were locked on the inside, and all I could do, I rung up everyone. And the surgeon come, and the police, and you gentlemen, and you know as much as what I do. If you won't be requiring me any more today, I'd be glad to be getting off home. It shook me up more than I thought for. Well, said one of the inspectors, when they were left alone, and, well, said the other inspector, and after a pause, what's the surgeon's report again? You got it there? Yes. Effect on the blood like the worst kind of snake bite, death almost instantaneous. I'm glad of that, for his sake. He was a nasty sight. No case for detaining this man Watkins, anyway. We know all about him. And what about this safe now? We'd better go over it again. And, by the way, we haven't opened that package he was busy with when he died. Well, handle it careful, said the other. There might be this snake in it, for what you know. Get a light into the corners of the place, too. Well, there's room for a shortish person to stand up in. But what about ventilation? Perhaps, said the other slowly, as he explored the safe with an electric torch. Perhaps they didn't require much of that. My word, it strikes warm coming out of that place. Like a vault it is. But here, what's this bank-like of dust all spread out into the room? That must have come there since the door was opened. It would sweep it all away if you moved it, see? Now, what do you make of that? Make of it? About as much as I make of anything else in this case. One of London's mysteries this is going to be, by what I can see. And I don't believe a photographer's box full of large-size, old-fashioned prayer books is going to take us much further. But that's just what your package is. It was a natural but hasty utterance. The preceding narrative shows that there was, in fact, plenty of material for constructing a case. And when once Messrs. Davidson and Witham had brought their end to Scotland Yard, the join-up was soon made and the circle completed. To the relief of Mrs. Porter, the owners of Broxstone decided not to replace the books in the chapel. They repose, I believe, in a safe deposit in town. The police have their own methods of keeping certain matters out of the newspapers. Otherwise, it can hardly be supposed that Watkins's evidence about Mr. Pozhovitz's death could have failed to furnish a good many headlines of a startling character to the press. A warning to the curious. The place on the east coast, which the reader is asked to consider, is Neighbour. It's not very different now from what I remember it to have been when I was a child. Marshes intersected by dikes to the south, recalling the early chapters of Great Expectations. Flat fields to the north, merging into heath. Heath, fir woods, and above all, gorse inland. A long seafront and a street. Behind that, a spacious church of flint, with a broad, solid western tower and a peal of 6 bells. How well I remember their sound on a hot Sunday in August, as our party went slowly up the white, dusty slope of road towards them, for the church stands at the top of a short, steep incline. They rang with a flat, clacking sort of sound on those hot days, but when the air was softer, they were mellower too. The railway ran down to its little terminus farther along the same road. There was a gay white windmill just before you came to the station, and another down near the shingle at the south end of the town, and yet others on higher ground to the north. There were cottages of bright red brick with slate roofs. But why do I encumber you with these commonplace details? The fact is that they come crowding to the point of the pencil when it begins to write of Neighbour. I should like to be sure that I'd allowed the right ones to get onto the paper. But I forgot. I have not quite done with the word-painting business yet. Walk away from the sea and the town, past the station, and turn up the road on the right. It is a sandy road, parallel with the railway, and if you follow it, it climbs to somewhat higher ground. On your left, you are now going northward, is heath. On your right, the side towards the sea, is a belt of old firs, wind-beaten, thick at the top, with the slope that old seaside trees have. Seen on the skyline from the train, they would tell you in an instant, if you did not know it, that you were approaching a windy coast. Well, at the top of my little hill, a line of these firs strikes out and runs towards the sea, for there is a ridge that goes that way, and the ridge ends in a rather well-defined mound commanding the level fields of rough grass, and a little knot of fir trees crowns it. And here you may sit on a hot spring day, very well content to look at the blue sea, white windmills, red cottages, bright green grass, church tower, and distant Martello Tower on the south. As I have said, I began to know Neighbour as a child, but a gap of a good many years separates my early knowledge from that which is more recent. Still, it keeps its place in my affections, and any tales of it that I pick up have an interest for me. One such tale is this. It came to me in a place very remote from Neighbour, and quite accidentally from a man whom I had been able to oblige, enough in his opinion to justify his making me his confidant to this extent. "I know all that country, more or less," he said. "I used to go to Neighbour pretty regularly for golf in the spring. I generally put up at the Bear with a friend. Henry Long it was. You knew him, perhaps?" "Slightly," I said. "And we used to take a sitting room and be very happy there. Since he died, I haven't cared to go there. And I don't know that I should anyhow, after the particular thing that happened on our last visit. It was in April we were there, and by some chance we were almost the only people in the hotel. So the ordinary public rooms were practically empty, and we were the more surprised when, after dinner, our sitting-room door opened and a young man put his head in. We were aware of this young man. He was rather rabbity, anemic subject, light hair and light eyes, but not unpleasing. So when he said, 'I beg your pardon, is this a private room?' we did not growl and say, 'Yes, it is,' but Long said, or I did, no matter which, 'Please come in.' 'Oh, may I?' he said, and seemed relieved. Of course, it was obvious that he wanted company, and as he was a reasonable kind of person, not the sort to bestow his whole family history on you, we urged him to make himself at home. "I dare say you find the other rooms rather bleak," I said. Yes, he did, but it was really too good of us, and so on. That being got over, he made some pretence of reading a book. Long was playing patience, I was writing. It became plain to me after a few minutes that this visitor of ours was in rather a state of fidgets or nerves, which communicated itself to me, and so I put away my writing and turned to at engaging him in talk. After some remarks, which I forget, he became rather confidential. "You'll think it very odd of me," this was the sort of way he began, "but the fact is, I've had something of a shock." Well, I recommended a drink of some cheering kind, and we had it. The waiter coming in made an interruption, and I thought our young man seemed very jumpy when the door opened, but after a while he got back to his woes again. There was nobody he knew in the place, and he did happen to know who we both were. It turned out there was some common acquaintance in town, and really he did want a word of advice if we didn't mind. Of course, we both said, by all means, or not at all, and Long put away his cards. And we settled down to hear what his difficulty was. "It began," he said, "more than a week ago, when I bicycled over to Froston, only about 5 or 6 miles, to see the church. I'm very much interested in architecture, and it's got one of those pretty porches with niches and shields. I took a photograph of it, and then an old man who was tidying up in the churchyard came and asked me if I'd care to look into the church. I said yes, and he produced a key and let me in. There wasn't much inside, but I told him it was a nice little church, and he kept it very clean. But, I said, the porch is the best part of it. We were just outside the porch then, and he said, 'Ah, yes, that is a nice porch. And do you know, sir, what's the meaning of that coat of arms there?' It was the one with the 3 crowns. And though I'm not much of a herald, I was able to say yes. I thought it was the old arms of the kingdom of East Anglia. 'That's right, sir,' he said. 'And you know the meaning of them 3 crowns that's on it?' I said I'd no doubt it was known, but I couldn't recollect to have heard it myself. 'Well, then,' he said, 'for all you're a scholard, I can tell you something you don't know. Them's the 3 holy crowns what was buried in the ground near by the coast to keep the Germans from landing.' I can see you don't believe that. But I tell you, if it hadn't been for one of them holy crowns being there still, them Germans would have landed here, time and time again, they would. Landed with their ships, killed men, woman, and child in their beds. Now then, that's the truth, what I'm telling you, that is. And if you don't believe me, ask the rector. Here he comes. You asked him,' I says. I looked round, and there was the rector, nice-looking old man, coming up the path. And before I could begin assuring my old man, who was getting quite excited, that I didn't disbelieve him, the rector struck in and said, 'What's all this about, John? Good day to you, sir. Have you been looking at our little church?' So then there was a little talk which allowed the old man to calm down, and then the rector asked him again what was the matter. 'Oh,' he said, 'it warn't nothing, only I was telling this gentleman he'd ought to ask you about them holy crowns.' 'Ah, yes, to be sure,' said the rector. 'That's a very curious matter, isn't it? But I don't know whether the gentleman is interested in our old stories, eh?' 'Oh, he'll be interested fast enough,' said the old man. 'He'll put his confidence in what you tells him, sir. Why, you known William Ager yourself, father and son, too.' Then I put in a word to say how much I should like to hear all about it, and before many minutes I was walking up the village street with the rector, who had 1 or 2 words to say to parishioners, and then to the rectory, where he took me into his study. He had made out on the way that I really was capable of taking an intelligent interest in a piece of folklore, and not quite the ordinary tripper. So he was very willing to talk, and it is rather surprising to me that the particular legend he told me has not made its way into print before. His account of it was this. There has always been a belief in these parts in the 3 holy crowns. The old people say they were buried in different places near the coast to keep off the Danes, or the French, or the Germans. And they say that one of the three was dug up a long time ago, and another has disappeared by the encroaching of the sea, and one's still left, doing its work, keeping off invaders. Well now, if you have read the ordinary guides and histories of this county, you will remember perhaps that in 1687 a crown, which was said to be the crown of Redwald, King of the East Angles, was dug up at Rendlesham, and alas, alas, melted down before it was even properly described or drawn. Well, Rendlesham isn't on the coast, but it isn't so very far inland, and it's on a very important line of access. And I believe that is the crown which the people mean when they say that one has been dug up. Then, on the south, you don't want me to tell you, where there was a Saxon royal palace, which is now under the sea, eh? Well, there was the second crown, I take it. And up beyond these two, they say, lies the third. Do they say where it is? Of course, I asked. He said, yes, indeed they do, but they don't tell. And his manner did not encourage me to put the obvious question. Instead of that, I waited a moment and said, what did the old man mean when he said you knew William Ager, as if that had something to do with the crowns? To be sure, he said. Now, that's another curious story. These Agers, it's a very old name in these parts, but I can't find that they were ever people of quality or big owners. These Agers say, or said, that their branch of the family were the guardians of the last crown. A certain old Nathaniel Ager was the first one I knew. I was born and brought up quite near here. And he, I believe, camped out at the place during the whole of the war of 1870. William, his son, did the same, I know, during the South African War. And young William, his son, who's only died fairly recently, took lodgings at the cottage nearest the spot, and I've no doubt hastened his end, for he was a consumptive, by exposure and night watching. And he was the last of that branch. It was a dreadful grief to him to think that he was the last, but he could do nothing. The only relations at all near to him were in the colonies. I wrote letters for him to them, imploring them to come over on business, very important to the family, but there's been no answer. So the last of the Holy Crowns, if it's there, has no guardian now. That was what the rector told me, and you can fancy how interesting I found it. The only thing I could think of when I left him was how to hit upon the spot where the crown was supposed to be. I wish I'd left it alone. But there was a sort of fate in it, for as I bicycled past the churchyard wall, my eye caught a fairly new gravestone, and on it was the name of William Ager. Of course, I got off and read it. It said, of this parish, died at Neighbour, 19, so on, aged 28. There it was, you see. A little judicious questioning in the right place, and I should at least find the cottage nearest the spot. Only I didn't quite know what was the right place to begin my questioning at. Again, there was fate. It took me to the curiosity shop down that way, you know, and I turned over some old books. And if you please, one was a prayer book of 1740-odd in a rather handsome binding. I'll just go and get it. It's in my room. He left us in a state of some surprise, but we had hardly time to exchange any remarks when he was back, panting, and handed us the book, opened at the flyleaf, on which was, in a straggly hand, Nathaniel Ager is my name, and England is my nation. Neighbour is my dwelling place, and Christ is my salvation. When I am dead and in my grave, and all my bones are rotten, I hope the Lord will think on me when I am quite forgotten. This poem was dated 1754, and there were many more entries of Agers. Nathaniel, Frederick, William, and so on, ending with William 1900 and so on. You see, he said, anybody would call it the greatest bit of luck. I did, but I don't now. Of course, I asked the shopman about William Ager, and of course he happened to remember that he lodged in a cottage in the North Field and died there. This was just chalking the road for me. I knew which the cottage must be. There is only one sizable one about there. The next thing was to scrape some sort of acquaintance with the people, and I took a walk that way at once. A dog did the business for me. He made at me so fiercely that they had to run out and beat him off, and then naturally begged my pardon, and we got into talk. I had only to bring up Ager's name and pretend I knew, or thought I knew, something of him, and then the woman said how sad it was, him dying so young, and she was sure it came of him spending the night out of doors in the cold weather. Then I had to say, did he go out on the sea at night? And she said, oh no, it was on the hillock yonder with the trees on it. And there I was. I know something about digging in these barrows. I've opened many of them in the down country. But that was with owner's leave, and in broad daylight, and with men to help. I had to prospect very carefully here before I put a spade in. I couldn't trench across the mound, and with those old firs growing there, I knew there would be awkward tree roots. Still, the soil was very light and sandy and easy, and there was a rabbit hole or so that might be developed into a sort of tunnel. The going out and coming back at odd hours to the hotel was going to be the awkward part. When I made up my mind about the way to excavate, I told the people that I was called away for a night, and I spent it out there. I made my tunnel. I won't bore you with the details of how I supported it and filled it when I'd done, but the main thing is that I got the crown. Naturally, we both broke out into exclamations of surprise and interest. I, for one, had long known about the finding of the crown at Rendlesham, and had often lamented its fate. No one has ever seen an Anglo-Saxon crown, at least no one had, but our man gazed at us with a rueful eye. Yes, he said, and the worst of it is, I don't know how to put it back. Put it back? We cried out. Why, my dear sir, you've made one of the most exciting finds ever heard of in this country. Of course it ought to go to the jewel house at the Tower. What's your difficulty? If you're thinking about the owner of the land and treasure trove and all that, we can certainly help you through. Nobody's going to make a fuss about technicalities in a case of this kind. Probably more was said, but all he did was to put his face in his hands and mutter, I don't know how to put it back. At last, Long said, You'll forgive me, I hope, if I seem impertinent, but are you quite sure you've got it? I was wanting to ask much the same question myself, for of course the story did seem a lunatic's dream when one thought over it. But I hadn't quite dared to say what might hurt the poor young man's feelings. However, he took it quite calmly, really with the calm of despair, you might say. He sat up and said, Oh, yes, there's no doubt of that. I have it here, in my room, locked up in my bag. You can come and look at it if you like. I won't offer to bring it here. We were not likely to let the chance slip. We went with him. His room was only a few doors off. The Boots was just collecting shoes in the passage, or so we thought. And afterwards we were not sure. Our visitor, his name was Paxton, was in a worse state of shivers than before, and went hurriedly into the room and beckoned us after him, turned on the light and shut the door carefully. Then he unlocked his kit bag and produced a bundle of clean pocket handkerchiefs in which something was wrapped, laid it on the bed, and undid it. I can now say I have seen an actual Anglo-Saxon crown. It was of silver, as the Rendlesham one is always said to have been. It was set with some gems, mostly antique intaglios and cameos, and was of rather plain, almost rough workmanship. In fact, it was like those you see on the coins and in the manuscripts. I found no reason to think it was later than the 9th century. I was intensely interested, of course, and I wanted to turn it over in my hands, but Paxton prevented me. Don't you touch it, he said. I'll do that. And with a sigh that was, I declare to you, dreadful to hear, he took it up and turned it about so that we could see every part of it. "Seen enough?" he said at last, and we nodded. He wrapped it up and locked it in his bag and stood looking at us dumbly. "Come back to our room," Long said, "and tell us what the trouble is." He thanked us and said, "Well, you go first and see if the coast is clear." That wasn't very intelligible, for our proceedings hadn't been, after all, very suspicious, and the hotel, as I said, was practically empty. However, we were beginning to have inklings of we didn't know what, and anyhow nerves are infectious. So we did go, first peering out as we opened the door, and fancying, I found we both had the fancy, that a shadow, or more than a shadow, but it made no sound, passed from before us to one side as we came out into the passage. "It's all right," we whispered to Paxton. Whispering seemed the proper tone, and we went, with him between us, back to our sitting room. I was preparing when we got there to be ecstatic about the unique interest of what we had seen, but when I looked at Paxton, I saw that would be terribly out of place, and I left it to him to begin. "What is to be done?" was his opening. Long thought it right, as he explained to me afterwards, to be obtuse, and said, "Why not find out who the owner of the land is and inform—" "Oh, no, no," Paxton broke in impatiently. "I beg your pardon. You've been very kind, but don't you see, it's got to go back. And I daren't be there at night, and daytime's impossible. Perhaps, though, you don't see. Well, then, the truth is that I've never been alone since I touched it." I was beginning some fairly stupid comment, but Long caught my eye and I stopped. Long said, "I think I do see, perhaps. But wouldn't it be a relief to tell us a little more clearly what the situation is?" Then it all came out. Paxton looked over his shoulder and beckoned to us to come nearer to him, and began speaking in a low voice. We listened most intently, of course, and compared notes afterwards, and I wrote down our version, so I'm confident I have what he told us, almost word for word. He said, "It began when I was first prospecting, and put me off again and again. There was always somebody, a man, standing by one of the firs. This was in daylight, you know. He was never in front of me. I always saw him with the tail of my eye on the left or the right, and he was never there when I looked straight for him. I would lie down for quite a long time and take careful observations and make sure there was no one, and then when I got up and began prospecting again, there he was. And he began to give me hints besides. For wherever I put that prayer book, short of locking it up, which I did at last, when I came back to my room, it was always out on my table, open at the flyleaf, where the names are, and one of my razors across it to keep it open. I'm sure he just can't open my bag, or something more would have happened. You see, he's light and weak, but all the same I daren't face him. Well then, when I was making the tunnel, of course it was worse. And if I hadn't been so keen, I should have dropped the whole thing and run. It was like someone scraping at my back all the time. I thought for a long time it was only soil dropping on me, but as I got nearer the crown, it was unmistakable. And when I actually laid it bare and got my fingers into the ring of it and pulled it out, there came a sort of cry behind me. Oh, can't tell you how desolate it was, and horribly threatening, too. It spoiled all my pleasure in my find, cut it off that moment. And if I hadn't been the wretched fool I am, I should have put the thing back and left it. But I didn't. The rest of the time was just awful. I had hours to get through before I could decently come back to the hotel. First, I spent time filling up my tunnel and covering my tracks, and all the while he was there, trying to thwart me. Sometimes, you know, you see him, and sometimes you don't. Just as he pleases, I think. He's there, but he has some power over your eyes. Well, I wasn't off the spot very long before sunrise, and then I had to get to the junction for Sebra and take a train back. And though it was daylight fairly soon, I don't know if that made it much better, There were always hedges or gorse bushes or park fences along the road, some sort of cover, I mean, and I was never easy for a second. And then when I began to meet people going to work, they always looked behind me very strangely. It might have been that they were surprised at seeing anyone so early, but I didn't think it was only that, and I don't now. They didn't look exactly at me. And the porter at the train was like that too, and the guard held open the door after I got into the carriage, just as he would if there was somebody else coming, you know. "Oh, you may be sure it isn't my fancy," he said with a dull sort of laugh. Then he went on, "And even if I do get it put back, he won't forgive me, I can tell that." And I was so happy a fortnight ago. He dropped into a chair, and I believe he began to cry. We didn't know what to say, but we felt we must come to the rescue somehow, and so it really seemed the only thing. We said that if he was so set on putting the crown back in its place, we would help him. And I must say that after what we had heard, it did seem the right thing. If these horrid consequences had come on this poor man, might there not really be something in the original idea of the crown having some curious power bound up with it to guard the coast? At least that was my feeling, and I think it was Long's too. Our offer was very welcome to Paxton, anyhow. When could we do it? It was nearing 10:30. Could we contrive to make a late walk plausible to the hotel people that very night? We looked out of the window. There was a brilliant full moon, the Paschal moon. Long undertook to tackle the boots and propitiate him. He was to say that we should not be much over the hour, and if we did find it so pleasant that we stopped out a bit longer, we would see that he didn't lose by sitting up. Well, we were pretty regular customers of the hotel and did not give much trouble, and were considered by the servants to be not under the mark in the way of tips. And so the boots was propitiated, and let us out onto the seafront, and remained, as we heard later, looking after us. Paxton had a large coat over his arm, under which was the wrapped-up crown. So we were off on this strange errand, before we had time to think how very much out of the way it was. I've told this part quite shortly on purpose, for it really does represent the haste with which we settled our plan and took action. "The shortest way is up the hill and through the churchyard," Paxton said, as we stood a moment before the hotel, looking up and down the front. There was nobody about, nobody at all. Seaburgh, out of the season, is an early, quiet place. "We can't go along the dyke by the cottage because of the dog," Paxton also said when I pointed to what I thought a shorter way along the front and across 2 fields. The reason he gave was good enough. We went up the road to the church and turned in at the churchyard gate. I confess to having thought that there might be some lying there who might be conscious of our business. But if it was so, they were also conscious that one who was on their side, so to say, had us under surveillance, and we saw no sign of them. But under observation we felt we were, as I have never felt it at another time. Especially was it so when we passed out of the churchyard into a narrow path with close, high hedges, through which we hurried, as Christian did, through that valley, and so got out into open fields. Then along hedges, though I would sooner have been in the open, where I could see if anyone was visible behind me. Over a gate or two, then a swerve to the left, taking us up onto the ridge, which ended in that mound. As we neared it, Henry Long felt, and I felt too, that there were what I can only call dim presences waiting for us, as well as a far more actual one attending us. Of Paxton's agitation all this time I can give you no adequate picture. He breathed like a hunted beast, and we could not either of us look at his face. How he would manage when we got to the very place we had not troubled to think. He had seemed so sure that that would not be difficult. Nor was it. I never saw anything like the dash with which he flung himself at a particular spot in the side of the mound and tore at it, so that in a very few minutes the greater part of his body was out of sight. We stood holding the coat and that bundle of handkerchiefs, and looking very fearfully, I must admit, about us. There was nothing to be seen. A line of dark firs behind us made one skyline. More trees and the church tower half a mile off on the right, cottages and a windmill on the horizon on the left, calm sea dead in front, faint barking of a dog at a cottage on a gleaming dyke between us and it, full moon making that path we know across the sea, the eternal whisper of the Scotch firs just above us and of the sea in front. Yet in all this quiet and acute and acrid consciousness of a restrained hostility very near us, like a dog on a leash that might be let go at any moment. Paxton pulled himself out of the hole and stretched a hand back to us. "Give it to me," he whispered. "Unwrapped." We pulled off the handkerchiefs, and he took the crown. The moonlight just fell on it as he snatched it. We had not ourselves touched that bit of metal, and I've thought since that it was just as well. In another moment, Paxton was out of the hole again and busy shoveling back the soil with hands that were already bleeding. He would have none of our help, though. It was much the longest part of the job to get the place to look undisturbed. Yet, I don't know how, he made a wonderful success of it. At last, he was satisfied, and we turned back. We were a couple of 100 yards from the hill when Long suddenly said to him, "I say, you've left your coat there. That won't do, see?" And I certainly did see it, the long, dark overcoat, lying where the tunnel had been. Paxton had not stopped, however. He only shook his head and held up the coat on his arm. And when we joined him, he said, without any excitement, but as if nothing mattered any more, "That wasn't my coat." And indeed, when we looked back again, that dark thing was not to be seen. Well, we got out onto the road and came rapidly back that way. It was well before 12 when we got in, trying to put a good face on it and saying, Long and I, what a lovely night it was for a walk. The Boots was on the lookout for us, and we made remarks like that for his edification as we entered the hotel. He gave another look up and down the seafront before he locked the front door and said, "You didn't meet many people about, I suppose, sir?" "No, indeed, not a soul," I said, at which I remember Paxton looked oddly at me. "Only I thought I seen someone turn up the station road after you, gentlemen," said the Boots. "Still, you was 3 together. I don't suppose he meant mischief." I didn't know what to say. Long merely said, "Good night," and we went off upstairs, promising to turn out all lights and to go to bed in a few minutes. Back in our room, we did our very best to make Paxton take a cheerful view. "There's the crown safe back," we said. "Very likely you'd have done better not to touch it." And he heavily assented to that. But no real harm has been done, and we shall never give this away to anyone who would be so mad as to go near it. Besides, don't you feel better yourself? "I don't mind confessing," I said, "that on the way there I was very much inclined to take your view about being followed, but going back, it wasn't at all the same thing, was it?" "No, it wouldn't do." "You've nothing to trouble yourselves about," he said. "But I'm not forgiven. I've got to pay for that miserable sacrilege still. I know what you're going to say. The church might help. Yes, but it's the body that has to suffer. It's true I'm not feeling that he's waiting outside for me just now, but..." Then he stopped. Then he turned to thanking us, and we put him off as soon as we could. And naturally we pressed him to use our sitting room next day and said we should be glad to go out with him. Or did he play golf, perhaps? Yes, he did, but he didn't think he should care about that tomorrow. Well, we recommended him to get up late and sit in our room in the morning while we were playing, and we would have a walk later in the day. He was very submissive and piano about it all, ready to do just what we thought best, but clearly quite certain in his own mind that what was coming could not be averted or palliated. You'll wonder why we didn't insist on accompanying him to his home and seeing him safe into the care of brothers or someone. The fact was, he had nobody. He had had a flat in town, but lately he had made up his mind to settle for a time in Sweden, and he had dismantled his flat and shipped off his belongings, and was whiling away a fortnight or 3 weeks before he made a start. Anyhow, We didn't see what we could do better than sleep on it, or not sleep very much, as was my case, and see what we felt like tomorrow morning. We felt very different, Long and I, on as beautiful an April morning as you could desire. And Paxton also looked very different when we saw him at breakfast. "The first approach to a decent night I seem ever to have had," was what he said. But he was going to do as we had settled, stay in probably all the morning and come out with us later. We went to the links. We met some other men and played with them in the morning and had lunch there rather early so as not to be late back. All the same, the snares of death overtook him. Whether it could have been prevented, I don't know. I think he would have been got at somehow, do what we might. Anyhow, this is what happened. We went straight up to our room. Paxton was there, reading quite peaceably. "Ready to come out shortly?" said Long. "Say in half an hour's time?" "Certainly," he said. And I said we would change first, perhaps have baths, and call for him in half an hour. I had my bath first, and went and lay down on my bed and slept for about 10 minutes. We came out of our rooms at the same time, and went together to the sitting-room. Paxton wasn't there, only his books. Nor was he in his room, nor in the downstairs rooms. We shouted for him. A servant came out and said, "Why, I thought you gentleman was gone out already. So did the other gentleman. He heard you were calling from the path there, and run out in a hurry. And I looked out of the coffee-room window, but I didn't see you. However, he ran off down the beach, that way." Without a word, we ran that way too. It was the opposite direction to that of last night's expedition. It wasn't quite 4 o'clock, and the day was fair, though not so fair as it had been, so there was really no reason, you'd say, for anxiety. With people about, surely a man couldn't come to much harm. But something in our look, as we ran out, must have struck the servant, for she came out on the steps and pointed and said, "Yes, that's the way he went." We ran on as far as the top of the shingle bank and there pulled up. There was a choice of ways, past the houses on the seafront, or along the sand at the bottom of the beach, which, the tide being now out, was fairly broad. Or, of course, we might keep along the shingle between these two tracks and have some view of both of them. Only that was heavy going. We chose the sand, for that was the loneliest, and someone might come to harm there without being seen from the public path. Long said he saw Paxton some distance ahead, running and waving his stick, as if he wanted to signal to people who were on ahead of him. I couldn't be sure. One of these sea mists was coming up very quickly from the south. There was someone, that's all I could say. And there were tracks on the sand, as of someone running who wore shoes, and there were other tracks made before those, for the shoes sometimes trod in them and interfered with them, of someone not in shoes. Oh, of course, it's only my word you've got to take for all this. Long's dead. We'd no time or means to make sketches or take casts, and the next tide washed everything away. All we could do was to notice these marks as we hurried on. But there they were, over and over again, and we had no doubt whatever that what we saw was the track of a bare foot, and one that showed more bones than flesh. The notion of Paxton running after anything like this, and supposing it to be the friends he was looking for, was very dreadful to us. You can guess what we fancied. How the thing he was following might stop suddenly and turn round on him, and what sort of face it would show, half seen at first in the mist, which all the while was getting thicker and thicker. And as I ran on, wondering how the poor wretch could have been lured into mistaking that other thing for us, I remembered his saying, "He has some power over your eyes." And then I wondered what the end would be, for I had no hope now that the end could be averted. And, well, there's no need to tell all the dismal and horrid thoughts that flitted through my head as we ran on into the mist. It was uncanny, too, that the sun should still be bright in the sky, and we could see nothing. We could only tell that we were now past the houses, and had reached that gap there is between them and the old Martello Tower. When you are past the tower, you know, there is nothing but shingle for a long way, not a house, not a human creature, just that spit of land, or rather shingle, with the river on your right and the sea on your left. But just before that, Just by the Martello Tower, you remember, there is the old battery, close to the sea. I believe there are only a few blocks of concrete left now. The rest has all been washed away, but at this time there was a lot more, though the place was a ruin. Well, when we got there, we clambered to the top as quick as we could to take breath and look over the shingle in front, if by chance the mist would let us see anything. But a moment's rest we must have. We had run a mile at least. Nothing whatever was visible ahead of us, and we were just turning by common consent to get down and run hopelessly on, when we heard what I can only call a laugh. And if you can understand what I mean by a breathless, a lungless laugh, you have it. But I don't suppose you can. It came from below and swerved away into the mist. That was enough. We bent over the wall. Paxton was there at the bottom. You don't need to be told that he was dead. His tracks showed that he had run along the side of the battery, had turned sharp round the corner of it, and, small doubt of it, must have dashed straight into the open arms of someone who was waiting there. His mouth was full of sand and stones, and his teeth and jaws were broken to bits. I only glanced once at his face. At the same moment, just as we were scrambling down from the battery to get to the body, we heard a shout and saw a man running down the bank of the Martello Tower. He was the caretaker, stationed there, and his keen old eyes had managed to descry through the mist that something was wrong. He had seen Paxton fall, and he'd seen us a moment after running up. Fortunate this, for otherwise we could hardly have escaped suspicion of being concerned in the dreadful business. Had he, we asked, caught sight of anybody attacking our friend? He could not be sure. We sent him off for help and stayed by the dead man till they came with a stretcher. It was then that we traced out how he had come on the narrow fringe of sand under the battery wall. The rest was shingle, and it was hopelessly impossible to tell whither the other had gone. What were we to say at the inquest? It was a duty we felt not to give up there and then the secret of the Crown, to be published in every paper. I don't know how much you would have told, but what we did agree upon was this: to say that we had only made acquaintance with Paxton the day before, and that he had told us he was under some apprehension of danger at the hands of a man called William Ager. Also, that we had seen some other tracks besides Paxton's when we followed him along the beach. But, of course, by that time, everything was gone from the sands. No one had any knowledge, fortunately, of any William Ager living in the district. The evidence of the man at the Martello Tower freed us from all suspicion. All that could be done was to return a verdict of wilful murder by some person or persons unknown. Paxton was so totally without connections that all the inquiries that were subsequently made ended in a no thoroughfare. And I have never been at Neighbour or even near it since. A neighbour's landmark. Those who spend the greater part of their time in reading or writing books are, of course, apt to take rather particular notice of accumulations of books when they come across them. They will not pass a stall, a shop, or even a bedroom shelf without reading some title, and if they find themselves in an unfamiliar library, no host need trouble himself further about their entertainment. The putting of dispersed sets of volumes together, or the turning right way up of those which the dusting housemaid has left in an apoplectic condition, appeals to them as one of the lesser works of mercy. Happy in these employments, and in occasionally opening an 18th century octavo to see what it is all about, and to conclude after 5 minutes that it deserves the seclusion it now enjoys, I had reached the middle of a wet August afternoon at Betton Court. "You begin in a deeply Victorian manner," I said. "Is this to continue?" "Remember, if you please," said my friend, looking at me over his spectacles, "that I am a Victorian by birth and education, and that the Victorian tree may not unreasonably be expected to bear Victorian fruit. Further, remember that an immense quantity of clever and thoughtful rubbish is now being written about the Victorian age. Now,
He went on, laying his papers on his knee. "That article, 'The Stricken Years,' in the Times Literary Supplement the other day. Able? Of course, it is able. But, oh, my soul and body, do just hand it over here, will you? It's on the table by you." "I thought you were to read me something you had written," I said, without moving. "But of course—" "Yes, I know," he said. "Very well, then. I'll do that first, but I should like to show you afterwards what I mean. However—" and he lifted the sheets of paper and adjusted his spectacles. "At Betton Court, where, generations back, the two country house libraries had been fused together, and no descendant of either stock had ever faced the task of picking them over or getting rid of duplicates. Now, I am not setting out to tell of rarities I may have discovered, of Shakespeare quartos bound up in volumes of political tracts, or anything of that kind, but of an experience which befell me in the course of my search, an experience which I cannot either explain away or fit into the scheme of my ordinary life. It was, I said, a wet August afternoon, rather windy, rather warm. Outside the window, great trees were stirring and weeping. Between them were stretches of green and yellow country, for the court stands high on a hillside, and blue hills far off, veiled with rain. Up above was a very restless and hopeless movement of low clouds travelling northwest. I had suspended my work, if you call it work, for some minutes to stand at the window and look at these things, and at the greenhouse roof on the right, with the water sliding off it, and the church tower that rose behind that. It was all in favour of my going steadily on. No likelihood of a clearing up for hours to come. I therefore returned to the shelves, lifted out a set of 8 or 9 volumes, lettered Tracts, and conveyed them to the table for closer examination. They were for the most part of the reign of Anne. There was a good deal of the late peace, the late war, the conduct of the Allies. There were also letters to a convocation man, sermons preached at St. Michael's, Queen Hithe, inquiries into a late charge of the Right Reverend the Lord Bishop of Winchester, or more probably Winton, to his clergy. Things all very lively once, and indeed still keeping so much of their old sting that I was tempted to betake myself into an armchair in the window and give them more time than I had intended. Besides, I was somewhat tired by the day. The church clock struck 4, and it really was 4, for in 1889 there was no saving of daylight. So I settled myself, and first I glanced over some of the war pamphlets, and pleased myself by trying to pick out Swift by his style from among the undistinguished. But the war pamphlets needed more knowledge of the geography of the Low Countries than I had. I turned to the church and read several pages of what the Dean of Canterbury said to the Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge on the occasion of their anniversary meeting in 1711. When I turned over to a letter from a beneficed clergyman in the country to the Bishop of wherever, I was becoming languid, and I gazed for some moments at the following sentence without surprise. "This abuse, for I think myself justified in calling it by that name, is one which I am persuaded your lordship would, if 'twere known to you, exert your utmost efforts to do away. But I am also persuaded that you know no more of its existence than, in the words of the country song, that which walks in Betton Wood knows why it walks or why it cries." Then indeed I did sit up in my chair and run my finger along the lines to make sure that I had read them right. There was no mistake. Nothing more was to be gathered from the rest of the pamphlet. The next paragraph definitely changed the subject. But I have said enough upon this topic, were its opening words. So discreet, too, was the namelessness of the beneficed clergyman that he refrained even from initials and had his letter printed in London. The riddle was of a kind that might faintly interest anyone. To me, who have dabbled a good deal in works of folklore, it was really exciting. I was set upon solving it. On finding out, I mean, what story lay behind it. And at least I felt myself lucky in one point, that, whereas I might have come on the paragraph in some college library far away, here I was at Betton, on the very scene of action. The church clock struck 5, and a single stroke on a gong followed. This, I knew, meant tea. I heaved myself out of the deep chair and obeyed the summons. My host and I were alone at the court. He came in soon, wet from a round of landlord's errands, and with pieces of local news which had to be passed on before I could make an opportunity of asking whether there was a particular place in the parish that was still known as Betton Wood. Betton Wood, he said, was a short mile away, just on the crest of Betton Hill, and my father stubbed up the last bit of it when it paid better to grow corn than scrub oaks. Why do you want to know about Betton Wood? Because, I said, in an old pamphlet I was reading just now, there are 2 lines of a country song which mention it, and they sound as if there was a story belonging to them. Someone says that someone else knows no more of whatever it may be than that which walks in Betton Wood knows why it walks or why it cries. Goodness, said Phillipson. I wonder whether that was why... I must ask old Mitchell. He muttered something else to himself and took some more tea, thoughtfully. Whether that was why... I said, yes, I was going to say whether that was why my father had the wood stubbed up. I said just now it was to get more ploughland, but I don't really know if it was. I don't believe he ever broke it up. It's rough pasture at this moment. But there's one old chap at least who'd remember something of it, old Mitchell. He looked at his watch. Blessed if I don't go down there and ask him. I don't think I'll take you, he went on. He's not so likely to tell anything he thinks is odd if there's a stranger by. Well, mind you remember every single thing he does tell. As for me, if it clears up, I shall go out, and if it doesn't, I shall go on with the books. It did clear up, sufficiently at least to make me think it worthwhile to walk up the nearest hill and look over the country. I did not know the lie of the land. It was the first visit I had paid to Phillipson, and this was the first day of it. So I went down the garden and through the wet shrubberies with a very open mind, and offered no resistance to the indistinct impulse, was it, however, so very indistinct, which kept urging me to bear to the left whenever there was a forking of the path. The result was that after 10 minutes or more of dark going between dripping rows of box and laurel and privet, I was confronted by a stone arch in the Gothic style, set in the stone wall which encircled the whole domain. The door was fastened by a spring lock, and I took the precaution of leaving this on the jar as I passed out into the road. That road I crossed, and entered a narrow lane between hedges which led upward, and that lane I pursued at a leisurely pace for as much as half a mile, and went on to the field to which it led. I was now on a good point of vantage for taking in the situation of the court, the village, and the environment, and I leant upon a gate and gazed westward and downward. I think we must all know the landscapes. Are they by Burkitt Foster, or somewhat earlier, which, in the form of woodcuts, decorate the volumes of poetry that lay on the drawing-room tables of our fathers and grandfathers, volumes in art cloth embossed bindings. This strikes me as being the right phrase. I confess myself an admirer of them, and especially of those which show the peasant leaning over a gate in a hedge and surveying, at the bottom of a downward slope, the village church spire, embosomed amid venerable trees, and a fertile plain intersected by hedgerows and bounded by distant hills, behind which the orb of day is sinking, or it may be rising, amid level clouds illumined by his dying or nascent ray. The expressions employed here are those which seem appropriate to the pictures I have in mind, and were there opportunity, I would try to work in the vale, the grove, the cot, and the flood. Anyhow, they're beautiful to me, these landscapes, and it was just such a one that I was now surveying. It might have come straight out of gems of sacred song selected by a lady and given as a birthday present to Eleanor Philipson in 1852 by her attached friend Millicent Graves. All at once, I turned as if I had been stung. There thrilled into my right ear and pierced my head a note of incredible sharpness, like the shriek of a bat, only 10 times intensified, the kind of thing that makes one wonder if something has not given way in one's brain. I held my breath and covered my ear and shivered. Something in the circulation. Another minute or two, I thought, and I return home. But I must fix the view a little more firmly in my mind. Only when I turned to it again, the taste was gone out of it. The sun was down behind the hill, and the light was off the fields. And when the clock bell in the church tower struck 7, I thought no longer of kind, mellow evening hours of rest, and scents of flowers and woods on evening air, and of how someone on a farm a mile or two off would be saying, "How clear Betton Bell sounds tonight after the rain." But instead, images came to me of dusty beams and creeping spiders and savage owls up in the tower, and forgotten graves and their ugly contents below, and of flying time and all it had taken out of my life. And just then, into my left ear, close as if lips had been put within an inch of my head, the frightful scream came thrilling again. There was no mistake possible now. It was from outside. With no language but a cry, was the thought that flashed into my mind. Hideous it was beyond anything I had heard or have heard since, but I could read no emotion in it, and doubted if I could read any intelligence. All its effect was to take away every vestige, every possibility of enjoyment, and make this no place to stay in one moment more. Of course, there was nothing to be seen, but I was convinced that if I waited, the thing would pass me again on its aimless, endless beat, and I could not bear the notion of a third repetition. I hurried back to the lane and down the hill. But when I came to the arch in the wall, I stopped. Could I be sure of my way among those dank alleys, which would be danker and darker now? No, I confessed to myself that I was afraid. So jarred were all my nerves with the cry on the hill that I really felt I could not afford to be startled even by a little bird in a bush or a rabbit. I followed the road which followed the wall, and I was not sorry when I came to the gate and the lodge and descried Philipson coming up towards it from the direction of the village. "And where have you been?" said he. "I took that lane that goes up the hill opposite the stone arch in the wall." "Oh, did you? Then you've been very near where Betton Wood used to be. At least, if you followed it up to the top and out into the field." And if the reader will believe it, that was the first time that I put 2 and 2 together. Did I at once tell Philipson what had happened to me? I did not. I have not had other experiences of the kind which are called supernatural or normal or physical, but though I knew very well I must speak of this one before long, I was not at all anxious to do so, and I think I have read that this is a common case. So all I said was, "Did you see the old man you meant to?" "Old Mitchell? Yes, I did, and got something of a story out of him. I'll keep it till after dinner. It really is rather odd." So when we were settled after dinner, he began to report, faithfully as he said, the dialogue that had taken place. Mitchell, not far off 80 years old, was in his elbow chair. The married daughter with whom he lived was in and out preparing for tea. After the usual salutations, "Mitchell, I want you to tell me something about the wood." "What wood's that, Master Reginald?" "Betton Wood. Do you remember it?" Mitchell slowly raised his hand and pointed an accusing forefinger. It was your father done away with Betton Wood, Master Reginald. I can tell you that much. Well, I know it was, Mitchell. You needn't look at me as if it were my fault. Your fault? No. I says it was your father done it before your time. Yes, and I dare say if the truth was known, it was your father that advised him to do it. And I want to know why. Mitchell seemed a little amused. Well, he said, my father was woodman to your father and your grandfather before him. And if he didn't know what belonged to his business, he'd ought to done. And if he did give advice that way, I suppose he might have had his reasons, mightn't he now? Of course he might. And I want you to tell me what they were. Well now, Master Reginald, whatever makes you think as I know what his reasons might have been, I don't know how many years ago. Well, to be sure, it is a long time, and you might easily have forgotten if ever you knew. I suppose the only thing is for me to go and ask old Ellis what he can recollect about it. That had the effect I hoped for. Old Ellis, he growled. First time ever I hear anyone say old Ellis were of any use for any purpose. I should have thought you'd know better than that yourself, Master Reginald. What do you suppose old Ellis can tell you better than what I can about Betton Wood? What call have he got to be put afore me, I should like to know? His father weren't woodman on the place, he was ploughman. That's what he was. So anyone can tell you what knows. Anyone can tell you that, I says. Just so, Mitchell. But if you know all about Betton Wood and won't tell me, why, I must do the next best I can and try and get it out of somebody else. And old Ellis has been on the place very nearly as long as you have. That he ain't, not by 18 months. Who says I wouldn't tell you nothing about the wood? I ain't no objection. Only it's a funny kind of tale. Tain't right to my thinking. It should be all about the parish. You, Lizzie, do you keep in your kitchen a bit? Me and Master Reginald wants to have a word or two private. Well, one thing I'd like to know, Master Reginald, what come to put you upon asking about it today? Oh, well, I happened to hear of an old saying about something that walks in Betton Wood, and I wondered if that had anything to do with its being cleared away, that's all. Well, you was in the right, Master Reginald, however you come to hear of it. And I believe I can tell you the rights of it better than anyone in this parish, let alone old Ellis. You see, it came about this way, that the shortest road to Allen's farm laid through the wood. And when we was little, my poor mother, she used to go so many times in the week to the farm to fetch a quart of milk. Because Mr. Allen, what had the farm then, under your father, he was a good man, and anyone that had a young family to bring up, he was willing to allow 'em so much in the week. But never you mind about that now. And my poor mother, she never liked to go through the wood, because there was a lot of talk in the place, and sayings like what you spoke about just now. But every now and again, when she happened to be late with her work, she'd have to take the short road through the wood, and as sure as ever she did, she'd come home in a rare state. And I remember her and my father talking about it, and he'd say, well, but it can't do you no harm, Emma. And she'd say, oh, but you haven't an idea of it, George. Why, it went right through my head, she says. And I came over all bewildered like, and as if I didn't know where I was. You see, George, she says, it ain't as if you was about there in the dusk. You always go there in the daytime. Now, don't you? And he says, why, to be sure I do. Do you take me for a fool? And so they go on. And time passed by. And I think it wore her out because, you understand, it wasn't no use to go for the milk not till the afternoon. And she wouldn't never send none of us children instead for fear we should get a fright. No, she wouldn't tell us about it herself. No, she says, it's bad enough for me. I don't want no one else to go through it. Nor yet hear talk about it. But one time, I recollect, she says, well, first it's a rustling like all along in the bushes, coming very quick, either towards me or after me, according to the time. And then there comes this scream, as appears to pierce right through from one ear to the other. And the later I'm coming through, the more like I am to hear it twice over. But thanks be, I never yet heard it the 3 times. And then I asked her, and I says, why, That seems like someone walking to and fro all the time, don't it? And she says, yes, it do. And whatever it is she wants, I can't think. And I says, is it a woman, Mother? And she says, yes, I've heard it's a woman. Anyway, the end of it was my father, he spoke to your father and told him the wood was a bad wood. There's never a bit of game in it, and there's never a bird's nest there, he says, and it ain't no matter of use to you. And after a lot of talk, your father, he come and see my mother about it, and he sees she weren't one of these silly women as gets nervish about nothing at all, and he made up his mind there was something in it, and after that he asked about it in the neighbourhood, and I believe he made out something, and wrote it down in a paper, which, very like, you got up at the court, Master Reginald. And then he gave the order, and the wood was stubbed up. They done all the work in the daytime, I recollect, and was never there after 3 o'clock. Didn't they find anything to explain it, Mitchell? No bones or anything of that kind? Nothing at all, Master Reginald. Only the mark of a hedge and ditch along the middle, much about where the quickset edge run now. And with all the work they done, if there had been anyone put away there, they was bound to find them. But I don't know whether it done much good after all. People here don't seem to like the place no better than they did afore. That's about what I got out of Mitchell, said Phillipson. And as far as any explanation goes, it leaves us very much where we were. I must see if I can't find that paper. Why didn't your father ever tell you about the business? I said. He died before I went to school, you know, and I imagine he didn't want to frighten us children by any such story. I can remember being shaken and slapped by my nurse for running up that lane towards the wood when we were coming back rather late one winter afternoon. But in the daytime, no one interfered with our going into the wood if we wanted to, only we never did want. I said. And then, do you think you'll be able to find that paper that your father wrote? Yes, he said, I do. I expect it's no farther away than that cupboard behind you. There's a bundle or two of things specially put aside, most of which I've looked through at various times, and I know there's one envelope labelled Betton Wood. But as there was no Betton Wood any more, I never thought it would be worthwhile to open it, and I never have. We'll do it now, though. Before you do, I said. I was still reluctant, but I thought this was perhaps the moment for my disclosure. I'd better tell you, I think Mitchell was right when he doubted if clearing away the wood had put things straight. And I gave the account you have heard already. I need not say Phillipson was interested. Still there, he said. It's amazing. Look here, will you come out there with me now and see what happens? I will do no such thing, I said, and if you knew the feeling, you'd be glad to walk 10 miles in the opposite direction. Don't talk of it. Open your envelope, and let's hear what your father made out. He did so, and read me the 3 or 4 pages of jottings which it contained. At the top was written a motto from Scott's Glenfinlass, which seemed to me well chosen. Where walks, they say, the shrieking ghost. Then there were notes of his talk with Mitchell's mother, from which I extract only this much. I asked her if she never thought she saw anything to account for the sounds she heard. She told me no more than once on the darkest evening she ever came through the wood, and then she seemed forced to look behind her as the rustling came in the bushes, and she thought she saw something all in tatters, with the 2 arms held out in front of it coming on very fast. And at that she ran for the stile and tore her gown all to flinders, getting over it. Then he had gone to 2 other people, whom he found very shy of talking. They seemed to think, among other things, that it reflected discredit on the parish. However, one, Mrs. Emma Frost, was prevailed upon to repeat what her mother had told her. They say it was a lady of title that married twice over, and her first husband went by the name of Brown, or it might have been Bryan. Yes, there were Bryans at the court before it came into our family, Phillipson put in. And she removed her neighbour's landmark. Leastways, she took in a fair piece of the best pasture in Betton parish, what belonged by rights to 2 children, as hadn't no one to speak for them. And they say years after she went from bad to worse, and made out false papers to gain thousands of pounds up in London, and at last they was proved in law to be false, and she would have been tried and put to death very like, only she escaped away for the time. But no one can't avoid the curse that's laid on them that removes the landmark, and so we take it she can't leave Betton before someone take and put it right again." At the end of the paper there was a note to this effect: "I regret that I cannot find any clue to previous owners of the fields adjoining the wood. I do not hesitate to say that if I could discover their representatives, I should do my best to indemnify them for the wrong done to them in years now long past. For it is undeniable that the wood is very curiously disturbed in the manner described by the people of the place. In my present ignorance, alike of the extent of the land wrongly appropriated and of the rightful owners, I am reduced to keeping a separate note of the profits derived from this part of the estate, and my custom has been to apply the sum that would represent the annual yield of about 5 acres to the common benefit of the parish and to charitable uses, and I hope that those who succeed me may see fit to continue this practice." So much for the elder Mr. Phillipson's paper. To those who, like myself, are readers of the state trials, it will have gone far to illuminate the situation. They will remember how, between the years 1678 and 1684, the Lady Ivy, formerly Theodosia Bryan, was alternately plaintiff and defendant in a series of trials in which she was trying to establish a claim against the Dean and Chapter of St. Paul's for a considerable and very valuable tract of land in Shadwell. How in the last of those trials, presided over by Lord Chief Justice Jeffreys, it was proved up to the hilt that the deeds upon which she based her claim were forgeries executed under her orders, and how, after an information for perjury and forgery was issued against her, she disappeared completely. So completely, indeed, that no expert has ever been able to tell me what became of her. Does not the story I have told suggest that she may still be heard of on the scene of one of her earlier and more successful exploits? "That," said my friend as he folded up his papers, "is a very faithful record of my one extraordinary experience. And now," but I had so many questions to ask him, as, for instance, whether his friend had found the proper owner of the land, whether he had done anything about the hedge, whether the sounds were ever heard now, what was the exact title and date of his pamphlet, etc., etc., that bedtime came and passed without his having an opportunity to revert to the literary supplement of the Times. A footnote. Thanks to the researches of Sir John Fox in his book on The Lady Ivy's Trial, Oxford 1929, we now know that my heroine died in her bed in 1695, having, heaven knows how, been acquitted of the forgery, for which she had undoubtedly been responsible.
The Rose Garden. Mr. and Mrs. Anstruther were at breakfast in the parlour of Westfield Hall in the county of Essex. They were arranging plans for the day. "George," said Mrs. Anstruther, "I think you'd better take the car to Malden and see if you can get any of those knitted things I was speaking about, which would do for my stall at the bazaar." "Oh, well, if you wish it, Mary, of course I can do that, but I had half arranged to play a round with Geoffrey Williamson this morning. The bazaar isn't till Thursday of next week, is it?" "What has that to do with it, George? I should have thought you would have guessed that if I can't get the things I want in Malden, I shall have to write to all manner of shops in town, and they are certain to send something quite unsuitable in price or quality the first time. If you have actually made an appointment with Mr. Williamson, you'd better keep it, but I must say I think you might have let me know." "Oh, no, it wasn't really an appointment. I quite see what you mean. I'll go. And what shall you do yourself?" "Why, when the work of the house is arranged for, I must see about laying out my new rose garden. By the way, before you start for Malden, I wish you would just take Collins to look at the place I fixed upon. You know it, of course." "Well, I'm not quite sure that I do, Mary. Is it at the upper end, towards the village?" "Good gracious, no, my dear George. I thought I had made that quite clear. No, it's that small clearing just off the shrubbery path that goes towards the church." "Oh, yes, yes. Where we were saying there must have been a summer house once. The place with the old seat and the posts. But do you think there's enough sun there?" "My dear George, do allow me some common sense, and don't credit me with all your ideas about summer houses. Yes, there will be plenty of sun when we have got rid of some of those box bushes. I know what you're going to say, and I have as little wish as you to strip the place bare. All I want Collins to do is to clear away the old seats and the posts and things before I come out in an hour's time. And I hope you will manage to get off fairly soon. After luncheon, I think I shall go on with my sketch of the church. And if you please, you can go over to the links. Or... a good idea. Very good, yes. You finish that sketch, Mary, and I shall be glad of a round." "I was going to say you might call on the bishop, but I suppose it's no use my making any suggestion. And now do be getting ready, or half the morning will be gone." Mr. Anstruther's face, which had shown symptoms of lengthening, shortened itself again, and he hurried from the room and was soon heard giving orders in the passage. Mrs. Anstruther, a stately dame of some 50 summers, proceeded, after a second consideration of the morning's letters, to her housekeeping. Within a few minutes Mr. Anstruther had discovered Collins in the greenhouse, and they were on their way to the site of the projected rose garden. I do not know much about the conditions most suitable to these nurseries, but I am inclined to believe that Mrs. Anstruther, though in the habit of describing herself as a great gardener, had not been well advised in the selection of a spot for the purpose. It was a small, dank clearing, bounded on one side by a path, and on the other by thick box bushes, laurels, and other evergreens. The ground was almost bare of grass and dark of aspect. Remains of rustic seats and an old and corrugated oak post somewhere near the middle of the clearing had given rise to Mr. Anstruther's conjecture that a summer house had once stood there. Clearly Collins had not been put in possession of his mistress's intentions with regard to this plot of ground, and when he learnt them from Mr. Anstruther, he displayed no enthusiasm. "Of course, I could clear them seats away soon enough," he said. "They aren't no ornament to the place, Mr. Anstruther, and rotten, too. Look here, sir," and he broke off a large piece, "rotten right through. Yes, clear them away, to be sure we can do that." "And the post," said Mr. Anstruther, "that's got to go too." Collins advanced and shook the post with both hands. Then he rubbed his chin. "That's firm in the ground, that post is," he said. "Has been there a number of years, Mr. Anstruther. I doubt I shan't get that up, not quite so soon as what I can do with them seats." "But your mistress specially wishes it to be got out of the way in an hour's time," said Mr. Anstruther. Collins smiled and shook his head slowly. "You'll excuse me, sir, but you feel of it for yourself. No, sir, no one can't do what's impossible to 'em, can they, sir? I could get that post up by after tea time, sir, but it'll want a lot of digging. What you require, you see, sir, if you'll excuse me naming of it, you want the soil loosening around this post here, and me and the boy, we shall take a little time doing that. But now these here seats," said Collins, appearing to appropriate this portion of the scheme as due to his own resourcefulness. "Why, I can get the barrow round and have them cleared away in, less than an hour's time from now, if you'll permit of it. Only—" "Only what, Collins?" "Well, now, it ain't for me to go against orders, no more than what it is for you yourself or anyone else." This was added somewhat hurriedly. "But if you'll pardon me, sir, this ain't the place I should have picked out for no rose garden myself. Why, look at them box and laurustinus. How they regular preclude the light from—" "Ah, yes, but we've got to get rid of some of them, of course."
Oh, indeed, get rid of them, yes, to be sure, but, I beg your pardon, Mr. Anstruther. I'm sorry, Collins, but I must be getting on now. I hear the car at the door. Your mistress will explain exactly what she wishes. I'll tell her then that you can see your way to clearing away the seats at once, and the post this afternoon. Good morning. Collins was left rubbing his chin. Mrs. Anstruther received the report with some discontent, but did not insist upon any change of plan. By 4 o'clock that afternoon she had dismissed her husband to his golf, had dealt faithfully with Collins and with the other duties of the day, and, having sent a camp stool and umbrella to the proper spot, had just settled down to her sketch of the church, as seen from the shrubbery, when a maid came hurrying down the path to report that Miss Wilkins had called. Miss Wilkins was one of the few remaining members of the family from whom the Anstruthers had bought the Westfield estate some few years back. She had been staying in the neighbourhood, and this was probably a farewell visit. "Perhaps you could ask Miss Wilkins to join me here," said Mrs. Anstruther, and soon Miss Wilkins, a person of mature years, approached. "Yes, I'm leaving the Ashes tomorrow, and I shall be able to tell my brother how tremendously you have improved the place. Of course, he can't help regretting the old house just a little, as I do myself, but the garden is really delightful now. I am so glad you can say so. But you mustn't think we've finished our improvements. Let me show you where I mean to put a rose garden. It's close by here." The details of the project were laid before Miss Wilkins at some length, but her thoughts were evidently elsewhere. "Yes, delightful," she said at last, rather absently. "But, do you know, Mrs. Anstruther, I'm afraid I was thinking of old times. I'm very glad to have seen just this spot again before you altered it. Frank and I had quite a romance about this place." "Yes," said Mrs. Anstruther, smilingly. "Do tell me what it was. Something quaint and charming, I'm sure." "Not so very charming, but it has always seemed to me curious. Neither of us would ever be here alone when we were children, and I'm not sure that I should care about it now in certain moods. It's one of those things that can hardly be put into words, by me at least, and that sound rather foolish if they're not properly expressed. I can tell you after a fashion what it was that gave us, well, almost a horror of the place when we were alone. It was towards the evening of one very hot autumn day, when Frank had disappeared mysteriously about the grounds, and I was looking for him to fetch him to tea. And going down this path, I suddenly saw him, not hiding in the bushes, as I rather expected, but sitting on the bench in the old summer-house. There was a wooden summer-house here, you know. Up in the corner, asleep, but with such a dreadful look on his face that I really thought he must be ill, or even dead. I rushed at him and shook him, and told him to wake up, and wake up he did, with a scream. I assure you the poor boy seemed almost beside himself with fright. He hurried me away to the house, and was in a terrible state all that night, hardly sleeping. Someone had to sit up with him, as far as I remember. He was better very soon, but for days I couldn't get him to say why he had been in such a condition. It came out at last that he'd really been asleep, and had had a very odd, disjointed sort of dream. He never saw much of what was around him, but he felt the scenes most vividly. First, he made out that he was standing in a large room with a number of people in it, and that someone was opposite to him who was very powerful, and he was being asked questions which he felt to be very important, and whenever he answered them, someone, either the person opposite to him or someone else in the room, seemed to be, as he said, making something up against him. All the voices sounded to him very distant, but he remembered bits of the things that were said. "Where were you on the 19th of October? And is this your handwriting?" and so on. I can see now, of course, that he was dreaming of some trial, but we were never allowed to see the papers, and it was odd that a boy of 8 should have such a vivid idea of what went on in a court. All the time he felt, he said, the most intense anxiety and oppression and hopelessness, though I don't suppose he used such words as that to me. Then after that there was an interval in which he remembered being dreadfully restless and miserable. And then there came another sort of picture, when he was aware that he had come out of doors on a dark, raw morning with a little snow about. It was in a street, or at any rate among houses, and he felt that there were numbers and numbers of people there too, and that he was taken up some creaking wooden steps and stood on a sort of platform, but the only thing he could actually see was a small fire burning somewhere near him. Someone who had been holding his arm left hold of it and went towards this fire. And then he said the fright he was in was worse than at any other part of his dream, and if I had not wakened him up, he didn't know what would have become of him. A curious dream for a child to have, wasn't it? Well, so much for that. It must have been later in the year that Frank and I were here, and I was sitting in the arbour just about sunset. I noticed the sun was going down, and told Frank to run in and see if tea was ready, while I finished a chapter in the book I was reading. Frank was away longer than I expected, and the light was going so fast that I had to bend over my book to make it out. All at once, I became conscious that someone was whispering to me inside the arbour. The only words I could distinguish, or thought I could, were something like, "Pull, pull. I'll push. You'll pull." I started up in something of a fright. The voice, it was little more than a whisper, sounded so hoarse and angry, and yet as if it came from a long, long way off, just as it had done in Frank's dream. But though I was startled, I had enough courage to look round and try to make out where the sound came from. And, this sounds very foolish, I know, but still it is the fact, I made sure that it was strongest when I put my ear to an old post, which was part of the end of the seat. I was so certain of this that I remember making some marks on the post, as deep as I could, with the scissors out of my work basket. I don't know why. I wonder, by the way, whether that isn't the very post itself. Well, yes, it might be. There are marks and scratches on it, but one can't be sure. Anyhow, it was just like that post you have there. My father got to know that both of us had had a fright in the arbour, and he went down there himself one evening after dinner, and the arbour was pulled down at very short notice. I recollect hearing my father talking about it to an old man who used to do odd jobs in the place, and the old man saying, "Don't you fear for that, sir. He's fast enough in there without no one don't take and let him out." But when I asked who it was, I could get no satisfactory answer. Possibly my father or mother might have told me more about it when I grew up, but as you know, they both died when we were still quite children. I must say it has always seemed very odd to me, and I've often asked the older people in the village whether they knew of anything strange, but either they knew nothing or they wouldn't tell me. Dear, dear, I've been boring you with my childish remembrances, but indeed that arbour did absorb our thoughts quite remarkably for a time. You can fancy, can't you, the kind of stories that we made up for ourselves. Well, dear Mrs. Anstruther, I must be leaving you now. We shall meet in town this winter, I hope, shan't we, etc., etc., etc. The seats and the post were cleared away and uprooted respectively by that evening. Late summer weather is proverbially treacherous, and during dinner time Mrs. Collins sent up to ask for a little brandy, because her husband had took a nasty chill, and she was afraid he would not be able to do much next day. Mrs. Anstruther's morning reflections were not wholly placid. She was sure some roughs had got into the plantation during the night. "And another thing, George, the moment that Collins is about again, you must tell him to do something about the owls. I never heard anything like them, and I'm positive one came and perched somewhere just outside our window. If it had come in, I should have been out of my wits. It must have been a very large bird from its voice. Didn't you hear it?" "No, of course not. You were sound asleep as usual. Still, I must say, George, you don't look as if your night had done you much good." "My dear, I feel as if another of the same would turn me silly. You have no idea of the dreams I had. I couldn't speak of them when I woke up, and if this room wasn't so bright and sunny, I shouldn't care to think of them even now. Well, really, George, that isn't very common with you, I must say. You must have... No, you only had what I had yesterday. Unless you had tea at that wretched clubhouse, did you? No, nothing but a cup of tea and some bread and butter. I should really like to know how I came to put my dream together, as I suppose one does put one's dreams together from a lot of little things one has been seeing or reading. Look here, Mary, it was like this, if I shan't be boring you. I wish to hear what it was, George. I will tell you when I've had enough. All right. I must tell you that it wasn't like other nightmares in one way, because I didn't really see anyone who spoke to me or touched me, and yet I was most fearfully impressed with the reality of it all. First, I was moving about in an old-fashioned sort of panelled room. I remember there was a fireplace and a lot of burnt papers in it, and I was in a great state of anxiety about something. There was someone else, a servant, I suppose, because I remember saying to him, "Horses, as quick as you can," and then waiting a bit. And next, I heard several people coming upstairs and a noise like spurs on a boarded floor. And then the door opened, and whatever it was that I was expecting happened. Yes? But what was that? You see, I couldn't tell. It was the sort of shock that upsets you in a dream. You either wake up, or else everything goes black. That was what happened to me. Then I was in a big dark-walled room, panelled, I think, like the other, and a number of people. And I was evidently standing your trial, I suppose, George. Goodness, yes, Mary, I was. But did you dream that too? How very odd. No, I didn't get enough sleep for that. Go on, George, and I will tell you afterwards. Yes, well, I was being tried for my life, I've no doubt, from the state I was in. I had no one speaking for me, and somewhere there was a most fearful fellow on the bench, I should have said, only that he seemed to be pitching into me most unfairly, and twisting everything I said, and asking most abominable questions. What about? Why, dates when I was at particular places, and letters I was supposed to have written, and why I had destroyed some papers. And I recollect his laughing at answers I made in a way that quite daunted me. It doesn't sound much, but I can tell you, Mary, it was really appalling at the time. I'm quite certain there was such a man once, and a most horrible villain he must have been. The things he said. Thank you. I have no wish to hear them. I can go to the links any day myself. How did it end? Oh, against me. He saw to that. I do wish, Mary, I could give you a notion of the strain that came after that, and seemed to me to last for days, waiting and waiting, and sometimes writing things I knew to be enormously important to me, and waiting for answers and none coming. And after that I came out. Ah. What makes you say that? Do you know what sort of thing I saw? Was it a dark, cold day, and snow in the streets, and a fire burning somewhere near you? By George, it was. You have had the same nightmare. Really not? Well, it is the oddest thing. Yes, I've no doubt it was an execution for high treason. I know I was laid on straw and jolted along most wretchedly, and then had to go up some steps, and someone was holding my arm, and I remember seeing a ladder and hearing a sound of a lot of people. I really don't think I could bear now to go into a crowd of people and hear the noise they make talking. However, mercifully, I didn't get to the real business. The dream passed off with a sort of thunder inside my head. But, Mary, I know what you're going to ask. I suppose this is an instance of a kind of thought-reading. Miss Wilkins called yesterday and told me of a dream her brother had as a child when they lived here, and something did no doubt make me think of that when I was awake last night listening to those horrible owls and those men talking and laughing in the shrubbery. By the way, I wish you would see if they'd done any damage and speak to the police about it. And so I suppose from my brain it must have got into yours while you were asleep. Curious, no doubt, and I am sorry it gave you such a bad night. You'd better be as much in the fresh air as you can today." "Oh, it's all right now. But I think I will go over to the lodge and see if I can get a game with any of them. And you?" "I have enough to do for this morning. And this afternoon, if I'm not interrupted, there's my drawing." "To be sure. I want to see that finished very much." No damage was discoverable in the shrubbery. Mr. Anstruther surveyed with faint interest the site of the rose garden, where the uprooted post still lay, and the hole it had occupied remained unfilled. Collins, upon inquiry made, proved to be better, but quite unable to come to his work. He expressed, by the mouth of his wife, a hope that he hadn't done nothing wrong clearing away them things. Mrs. Collins added that there was a lot of talking people in Westfield, and the Hold ones was the worst. Seemed to think everything of them having been in the parish longer than what other people had. But as to what they said, no more could then be ascertained than that it had quite upset Collins, and was a lot of nonsense. Recruited by lunch and a brief period of slumber, Mrs. Anstruther settled herself comfortably upon her sketching chair in the path leading through the shrubbery to the side gate of the churchyard. Trees and buildings were among her favourite subjects, and here she had good studies of both. She worked hard, and the drawing was becoming a really pleasant thing to look upon by the time that the wooded hills to the west had shut off the sun. Still, she would have persevered, but the light changed rapidly, and it became obvious that the last touches must be added on the morrow. She rose and turned towards the house, pausing for a time to take delight in the limpid green western sky. Then she passed on between the dark box bushes, and at a point just before the path debouched on the lawn, she stopped once again and considered the quiet evening landscape, and made a mental note that that must be the tower of one of the roofing churches that one caught on the skyline. Then a bird, perhaps, rustled in the box bush on her left, and she turned and started at seeing what at first she took to be a 5th of November mask peeping out among the branches. She looked closer. It was not a mask. It was a face, large, smooth, and pink. She remembers the minute drops of perspiration which were starting from its forehead. She remembers how the jaws were clean-shaven and the eyes shut. She remembers also, and with an accuracy which makes the thought intolerable to her, how the mouth was open and a single tooth appeared below the upper lip. As she looked, the face receded into the darkness of the bush. The shelter of the house was gained, and the door shut before she collapsed. Mr. and Mrs. Anstruther had been for a week or more recruiting at Brighton before they received a circular from the Essex Archaeological Society and a query as to whether they possessed certain historical portraits which it was desired to include in the forthcoming work on Essex portraits to be published under the Society's auspices. There was an accompanying letter from the Secretary which contained the following passage: "We are specially anxious to know whether you possess the original of the engraving of which I enclose a photograph. It represents so-and-so, Lord Chief Justice under Charles II, who, as you doubtless know, retired after his disgrace to Westfield and is supposed to have died there of remorse. It may interest you to hear that a curious entry has recently been found in the registers, not of Westfield, but of Prior's Ruthing, to the effect that the parish was so much troubled after his death that the rector of Westfield summoned the parsons of all the Ruthings to come and lay him, which they did. The entry ends by saying, 'The stake is in a field adjoining to the churchyard of Westfield on the west side.' Perhaps you can let us know if any tradition to this effect is current in your parish." The incidents which the enclosed photograph recalled were productive of a severe shock to Mrs. Anstruther. It was decided that she must spend the winter abroad. Mr. Anstruther, when he went down to Westfield to make the necessary arrangements, not unnaturally told his story to the rector, an old gentleman, who showed little surprise. Really, I had managed to piece out for myself very much what must have happened, partly from old people's talk and partly from what I saw in your grounds. Of course, we have suffered to some extent also. Yes, it was bad at first, like owls, as you say, and men talking sometimes. One night it was in this garden, and at other times about several of the cottages. But lately there's been very little. I think it will die out. There is nothing in our registers except the entry of the burial, and what I, for a long time, took to be the family motto. But last time I looked at it, I noticed that it was added in a later hand, and had the initials of one of our rectors, quite late in the 17th century. A.C. Augustine Crumpton. Here it is, you see. Quieta non movere. I suppose... Well, it is rather hard to say exactly what I do suppose.